Last night, Ukraine struck at the enemy's energy infrastructure. Our drones attacked an electrical substation that supplies power to Russian military facilities in the Volgograd region, hitting the Balashovskaya station. It provides electricity to the military district and the infrastructure of the Russian Ministry of Defense. This key facility of the Russian energy system has been attacked by drones for the second time in a week. And the day before, our drones caused a blackout in the Belgorod region, which further exacerbated the power supply problems for Russian troops in the area. Russian oil refineries are also regularly hit and set ablaze with enviable frequency. That's why Russia is looking for oil refining opportunities outside its own borders. The Russians sent their first batch of oil to Georgia, where a brand new refinery has just started operating. Orbán is also trying to help his friend Putin. But will he succeed? Because this week, oil refineries linked to Russia and located in Europe mysteriously caught fire in Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania. And now, Rostislav Sisoyev will tell us more about this.
Earlier this week, there was significant trouble and disruption at the Ryazan oil refinery, which is located in Russia. A part of the production facilities has been put out of commission, according to the Ukrainian General Staff, and this directly reduces the capabilities of the Russian army. Before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Ryazan oil refinery processed 17 million tons of oil per year. In terms of processing volume, this plant is one of the largest in Russia. Various grades of gasoline, diesel, fuel oil, and aviation gas were produced here. Its stable operation is extremely important for supplying fuel to Moscow and the surrounding region, but it gets hit regularly, this year in January and February, May and September. And this is what the overall map of damaged Russian oil refineries looks like. According to OSINT analysts, the strike on the Ryazan oil refinery was at least the 43rd since the beginning of the year. In total, more than 24 facilities have been hit. The plant in Saratov holds the record for the number of strikes. Refineries in Volgograd, Samara region, and Krasnodar Krai are also consistently put out of operation. Some of them were shut down temporarily, while others have yet to resume operations.
The actual losses across all of Russia in total are approximately 20%. And if we talk only about the European part, the loss in gasoline production really reaches up to 40%.
And as a result, a fuel crisis is spreading across the Federation. There is no gasoline in at least 50 Russian regions and in the occupied Ukrainian territories.
The situation with gasoline, in short, isn't changing. There's no 100 octane, no 95, not even 92.
Refineries are exploding and Russians are getting anxious while waiting in line at gas stations. The Russian authorities are forced to look abroad for plants to process their oil. The first batch was sent to Georgia. According to Reuters, more than 100,000 tons of Russian oil arrived at the Kulevy terminal from the port of Novorossiysk. This Georgian refinery started operating just a few weeks ago. It was launched by a family connected to the leadership of Russian military intelligence. This was uncovered by investigators from the Russian opposition outlet Proekt. Now, the first Georgian refinery will be able to process over 1 million tons of oil.
Georgia's oil refining capacity is currently relatively limited, and as a result, it wanted to change the situation, but Russia simply will not be able to, so the shortage will continue.
But the aggressor country also has other relatively neutral neighbors. For example, according to our experts, in September alone, Belarus increased its gasoline supplies to Russia fourfold. And then there's Kazakhstan and, of course, China.
Russia supplies oil to China at a discount. China refines this oil into petroleum products and is now going to supply these products to Russia, but without any discount.
Although not so long ago, the Russians themselves used to profit from selling petroleum products. Even last year, they sold almost $50 billion worth of gasoline and diesel. But 2025 is turning into a truly black year for Russian oil refining. And even the hypothetical relocation of refineries won't solve the problem.
China will not work entirely for Russia. Belarus, even though most likely they will pay a lot of attention to the Russian market, first of all, this will lead to shortages in their own domestic market. As for Azerbaijan, it's the same story. These countries will be selling leftovers, not what they actually produce overall.
So, the fuel shortage in Russia will continue. Ordinary Russians will be the ones paying for imported gasoline. Gas station prices will spike very soon. Extraordinary events also took place this week at European refineries that process Russian oil and thus serve as a source of income for the Kremlin. A plant in the capital of Slovakia caught fire. A fire broke out at Hungary's main oil refinery, and at a Romanian plant owned by the Russian company Lukoil, there was an explosion. The official causes of these incidents have not been reported. Rostislav Sisoyev, We Are Ukraine, United News Marathon.
And of course, the top story of this week is the American sanctions against the two largest oil giants, Lukoil and Rosneft. This comes after Putin once again delivered a political slap to Trump and then launched a massive attack on Ukraine's energy sector. After all the words and gestures, the American president canceled his meeting with him in Budapest and imposed energy sanctions against Moscow. And then the domino effect kicked in. Fearing secondary restrictions, China and India immediately decided to significantly reduce their purchases of Russian oil. And this seems to be just the beginning of the sanctions news for the Kremlin. More on this from Yuri Hula in America.
9 months of loud statements and finally, real action. Donald Trump admitted the Kremlin was simply leading him by the nose, and he responded with the most painful blow to Russian oil revenues. Rosneft, Lukoil, and 36 of their subsidiaries have come under sanctions. From now on, every contract and every liter of gasoline or oil is under the scrutiny of the United States.
No one expected such a swift turnaround, from embraces on the red carpet to a powerful sanctions blow from the White House. The restrictions on Russian oil came as a pleasant shock to the Allies and as despair for the Russians, since these two oil giants account for nearly half of all Russian exports. According to the US Treasury, the reason for imposing these measures was the Kremlin's lack of a serious approach to the peace process. In a word, unreliability in negotiations. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte reiterated this during his meeting with Trump. As soon as he arrives at the White House, you can expect good news for Ukraine. And this is not a coincidence, but already a pattern. During his previous visit in the summer, Trump approved the sale of weapons to Ukraine. Now, new sanctions against Russian energy.
I am absolutely convinced that if we keep up the pressure, we can force Putin to come to the negotiating table, agree to a ceasefire, and then move on to new negotiations. Putin only changes his calculations under pressure.
And according to informed sources cited by the Wall Street Journal, it was actually Trump's advisors who proposed 3 options for putting pressure on Russia. The harshest option targeted Russian industry and top leadership, the middle one was aimed at the energy sector, and the mildest involved limited measures, and he chose the middle option. The publication writes that the US president's decision was influenced by Russian strikes on Ukraine, which occurred each time after his good phone conversations with the head of Russia. Trump's patience ran out when he concluded that Putin was simply stringing him along and stalling for time.
I felt that the time had come. We waited for a long time. These are massive sanctions, very serious ones. They are aimed at 2 of their major oil companies. And we hope that these restrictions will not last long. We hope that the war will be stopped. We are considering supplying various types of missiles to Ukraine, but I think they won't be needed. We just want the Russians to turn around and go home.
Kremlin propaganda is in a frenzy, and in the Kremlin they say that American sanctions will have certain consequences, but will not significantly affect their economic situation.
Of course, this is not a friendly act towards Russia. This is obvious, and it does not strengthen Russian-American relations, which had only just begun to recover. This is an attempt to put pressure on Russia, but no self-respecting country ever does anything under pressure.
I'm glad that Putin believes the sanctions will not have an effect. Let's see in 6 months.
The White House believes that restrictions against Rosneft and Lukoil could fundamentally change the situation, given how fragile Russia's wartime economy is and how dependent it is on oil and gas revenues. And the sanctions haven't even taken effect yet, but the shares of both giants have lost over $5 billion in value in just 3 days. Moreover, they risk becoming outcasts for buyers and shippers and losing assets abroad. This is already creating real problems for Russian exports, making even Moscow's key partners, China and India, nervous.
I saw international news from China this morning. They are already cutting back on purchases of Russian oil there. We know that India has done the same at the president's request. The pressure is total and uncompromising. We expect these sanctions to cause damage.
Within just a few days, Indian refineries have reduced their purchases of Russian oil by 50%, according to Reuters. And soon, this figure could drop to 0. and this is despite the fact that Russia accounts for a third of all oil exports to the country. Precisely because of the risk of secondary sanctions, India is urgently studying how to refuse direct deliveries of sanctioned oil. China is facing the same problem. The risk of secondary sanctions for them means the threat of being cut off from services in Western banks, losing access to the dollar, and having contracts with American and European traders frozen. However, while the oil giants are figuring out how to reduce their purchases from Rosneft and Lukoil, the latter continues to calmly sell gasoline in the United States. At the red and white gas stations, prices are sometimes even lower than for local American fuel. Lukoil employees in New York have no idea about the sanctions imposed on them.
Are you still working?
Yes. Why?
Did you hear that sanctions were imposed on Russian oil this week?
I don't know anything about that.
There are about 200 such local Lukoil gas stations in the US, and they have exactly 1 month to cease operations. And although it's difficult to assess the effect of the American sanctions right now, for the Kremlin, they could become the most painful blow in recent years. Yuri Dud reporting from the US. News Marathon, the only news